Hello, I'm Emma Desi, and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers. If you're brand new here, welcome, and here's what you need to know. This is a community that believes you are never too old to write your first novel. No matter what you've been up to until now, if you're ready to write your book, I'm ready to help you reach the end. I focus on helping you find the time and confidence to begin your writing journey, as well as the craft and skills you need to finish the book. Each week I interview debut authors, editors and industry experts to keep you motivated, inspired and educated on all things writing, editing and publishing. If you want to catch up, head on over to emmadesi.com where you'll find a wealth of information and tools to help you get started. Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 Top Tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Steve Adams is a writer and playwright and has been widely published. He's won a Pushcart Prize and Glimmer Train's Short Story Award for New Writers and has also been listed for a notable essay in Best American Essays. He has also featured in a number of anthologies. Steve has been a guest artist at the University of Texas and his plays have been produced in New York City. He's a writing coach and freelance editor in Memphis. His first novel, Stay With Me a Little Longer, will be published by the University of Wisconsin Press in fall-winter of 2022. So let's delve in with Steve and find a little bit more about his journey to writing and playwriting and find out what he's up to now. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining me today.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
So I wonder if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about how you got started in writing and what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. It is because it's such a long story for me. It's very circuitous. I'll do the truncated version, but basically, I was going to the University of Texas in Austin, and I was one of these people who was lost, didn't know what they were going to do. Like I think a lot of artists are at various points, right? But so I stumbled into the theater program there. And I studied acting for 2 years. I wasn't a very good actor, and they kicked me out after 2 years. But it was I'm just really glad they did. That's one of the best things that happened to me because I wasn't really good, and I didn't want to be trying to do that. And I stumbled into a poetry course by a guy named Albert Goldbarth, who is a big, actually American poet. But he was younger then. He was just teaching and. It was like lights went out on my head and oh, these are my people. This is what I'm supposed to do. And so what happened then is after I got the poetry going and I'd been so underexposed to it. And it just, again, like lights going off my head. And I circled back through the theater program because that's where I was getting my degree. And I took up playwriting. And that was exciting and fun. And suddenly I was getting attention, which I needed. And at that point, and here's where, again, it is long, but I moved to New York. I'll try to keep this short. Moved to New York and enjoyed, had the wild time in New York, writing plays, getting little productions here and there. Never thought I would write prose. Never thought I would write prose at all. But then I decided I should write screenplays. Now I love New York. I went to Los Angeles thinking, oh, I'm going to be a famous screenwriter. And I wrote a stack of bad screenplays. And I just was not natural at that. I have friends who love it there, but it wasn't my city. It didn't feel right. And that world of screenwriting didn't feel right. So I tried to get philosophical and told myself, well, it's time for me to give up writing and be practical and, get a real job and do the normal things. And it didn't work out for me. After about 2 months, I started going kind of crazy. It's like, I need to write something. So I started writing prose for the first time. And at that point, I think earlier I didn't have the endurance for it. But at this point, I was just so hungry to write, and I felt like a horse just running through a field. And so that's where I started writing prose. And again, I go, oh, this is it. Why did it take me so long? But this is what I want to do. And so from that point on, I was mostly wrote short pieces, and I actually got some published immediately. And I think it's because I'd had all the playwriting training and all the other stuff. And so I wasn't totally off, I had a lot of foundation for what I was doing. But and then I decided to get my MFA, and I went to New York and I got my MFA and lived there some more. And that kept going on. And the thing with coaching, how this came around was like the American economy kind of collapsed in 2008, and I lost my wonderful New York day job. I love day jobs. You punch a clock and then you write on your own. You keep the lights on, and you're not dependent on, although now it's not a day job. I actually really love the coaching. But what that did is I lost the day job, so I had to find a new way. And I've always just loved talking about process and writing with people. It's just what I do. I mean, I'll chase them down the street so we can talk about it. And and so I had friends suggest I try coaching. I didn't even know people did this. And so I started up and slowly developed, people who wanted to work with me over time. And now it's all I do. I coach, either I do what I call developmental editing for generally larger projects, sometimes short work too, but the big projects are big. And then
I
I coach people.
I wonder if I could just take you back a step or two, because I was really interested in what you said about going from screenwriting to sort of prose writing, and you said you didn't think you had the endurance for it. And it's so interesting that you say that, because I think of writing a full-length play or writing a full-length script equally has a level of endurance that's just as tough. But what did you sort of find the main difference there when you talk about endurance? Is it because with the script it's dialogue mostly, or was it just because it was a new form for you?
Right. Well, I think actually that most of my plays, I'll admit that were successful. They were one acts. I was still doing short form stuff because that was my natural. I could just do that. I didn't have to think about it a whole lot, But every time I tried to stretch out and do full length, it was I couldn't figure out how to do it really. And I think me writing, what I'm calling a number of bad screenplays kind of built up my muscle to think, like you say, for more of that endurance, built it up. And then when I went into the prose, I had more endurance just from doing that. And I was thinking about long form structure, even if I had not understood it as well. But for me, the thing is I loved language. And like when I'd write a play, I would set up a monologue where I could do, interesting or beautiful language, because you have to really earn it. But I found that when with prose, I'm just sitting there and I could just drop into the world at this point in my life and just feel free without because screenplays are very constricted and you don't have control over content a lot, It's about concept and structure and all of that, but your language will very likely get lost. You can't, so that's where I figured it was language. So I could just run. Yeah, that's what I felt like the horse running across the field, So that, so that to me is the difference. It's like, and you get to do it all. You get to do it all with prose. You're the director, you're the actor, you're everything, and that's the challenge too. But I prefer that. I prefer getting to do everything than having to box myself in. I mean, there are brilliant screenwriters who are so good at this, but it's not the right form for me. So,
And there's a kind of natural fit between the two, I think, isn't there? You do hear of a lot of fiction writers who do study screenwriting because they want to improve that structure, that form, the kind of the patterns of storytelling that I think screenwriting teaches so well, that perhaps fiction, and maybe particularly literary fiction, doesn't teach quite so well. I'm thinking of the book, Save the Cat writes a book which is taken from the Blake Schneider script writing book. So do you feel that you actually doing that screenwriting first gave you a really good education and grounding in structure and flow before you're able to kind of then expand on the beautiful prose, if you like?
Right, yeah. I mean, it's totally right, because long form is long form, whether it's long form play or screenplay. They're big projects or a novel. And I really think mostly I just built up my muscle, because my screenplays really didn't work like they're supposed to. But it was me struggling through that. And then once writing prose, I totally turned around. And that's when I studied screenplays better. And like Robert McKee's Story was one book I read and go, oh my God, this show tells me how to build this long architectural thing that a novel is. And when and movies are so great too, because again, story, if you get structure down and you're writing a long form, well, then you can make it work, if your structure's sound. And so, but when I'm working with clients, because it's so easy to see a movie and talk about the structure of it, which is kind of what I teach with novel, right? But I say, like, I have a PowerPoint chart I did for The Godfather, breaking down the act structure so they can see where these turning points are. And so, but I had to study that and get that. And because I agree, I mean, I am a quote unquote literary writer, although I like it to think mine crosses over, that's commercial too. But I'm based in language and literary, and it often is a something lacking in literary fiction, where the structure isn't as sound as it could be. So I recommend people like read mystery novels and see movies, and I use those as examples to show how the story moves. So absolutely, it's great. It's good, really good to study that.
So you mentioned there that you write a lot of you're right on the more literary side, and I know that you write a lot of personal essays and creative nonfiction. And I wonder, what sort of topics do you find yourself drawn to? Do you like to maybe just the phase of life that you're in, that something around that is appealing, or do you like to write about the bigger subjects, politics or the environment? What appeals to you when you're writing a piece of memoir or creative nonfiction?
Yeah, what I'm drawn to more, I have this newsletter, and I was just writing about this. Mine is not it's just what I think you have to find as a writer, what draws you, what you fall in love with, what calls you. That's where you have to go, because that's where your genius is, your art is there, and not fight it too much, trying to, twist it into something that it doesn't want to be, and then trust that the material will do what it's supposed to do. So along those lines, I mean, the environment, my goodness, but how do you write a story that does that when you write personal stories? It's really difficult. So I write, I'm drawn to things that haunt me or call out to me, basically. And, a lot of that is, and I think a lot of memoir takes time and time in your life, because you're haunted by something in your past, or you can't stop thinking about, or you start thinking about it. It seems really interesting, that thing that happened to me 20 years ago, and you start writing it out, thinking about it, and you realize there's a story. Now that's a secret too, is to, this, it sounds obvious, but it's not. Like, where is there a real story? Is there a story there or not? Like, okay, I won this one big thing. It's a Pushcart Prize over here. It's really a big for memoir, and it was about my relationship with this guy in New York City for 8 years, and during that time I go, well, I was like in a New York story. I knew I was, and so when it ended, I mean, the thing is this: okay, I'm straight, he's gay, he was my shiatsu person. because of a bad injury he, kept me moving through. And so this relationship happened over 8 years. And then he got pancreatic cancer and died. And so it's all around all those feelings. And once that, in the middle of it, I go, I am in a story, this is a story. And then once he died, I knew, oh, I have to write about this. And it doesn't mean it has to be good even. Because I don't approach these things thinking, oh, I'm going to write the fabulous story. There's something I want to explore or try to understand better or give,
So let me ask you that, because that's a really interesting point that you brought up. I have a lot of memoirists in my audience, and I think a really useful question for them would be, how do you know when something has happened in your life? How do you know that it makes a good story? Or can you unearth a good story from anything that happens? It's just about knowing how to dig it out.
Yeah, and those, I would say, help me with that, because to me those are two separate questions.
Okay.
But the first one,
go on.
like I said, how do you know you have a story? And again, and believe me, I signed all high and mighty. Nobody wants to get published more than me, and that's just a fact, But when I'm writing, I try to not worry about that and go deep into the process of creation, because that's really where the joy in all this is. The other stuff is just a pretty illusion, and hopefully it happens. And yeah, I want an audience too. We need to connect. But but in this isn't, well, I'll just say it again. If I'm haunted by something, something that happened when I was 17, or 19, if that story for me, and again, part of it just may be the way my mind works, but I feel there's a shape of something there. And, like some, loss or something interesting or something meaningful beyond just, oh, that's a good story. Because that's not enough. It's got to have that meaningful thing going on, so that it allows you to go deep into. Like I have I can't talk about it yet, but I have a full-length memoir sitting that I need to work on. That it's halfway done. But the wild thing about this one for me was because I knew there's a period of life where I went through this whole process, and I knew at some point I would need to look at it, because there's something happened, and so I've gone into exploring it, but by writing it, it's been really interesting in that it's changed my whole perspective on what happened then. Like I had a narrative in my mind before I wrote it, of what this whole story was, and I mean it's still the same thing, but I've learned, like, wow, this is, I was doing better than I realized. This is wilder story than I realized, and have more respect for what I went through. So that's a real interesting side thing about this. But yeah, I mean, I guess I look for, if something has meaning, if it's loaded, if it's rich, if it draws my attention, that's kind of all I need to know. And I go in. And sometimes it just feels like what's going to be a short piece, or sometimes it feels like it's going to be a long piece.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Okay, so I love that. So that's a great tip for our listeners, that if they are writing a memoir, it's about digging down into because I do find a lot of new writers are because they're excited.
Yeah.
They focus very much on when I publish this book, when I get an agent.
Right.
But actually, putting a pause on that and coming back and right into the process and thinking about that moment that you want to write about, and taking your time, it sounds like, as well, just to really unearth it, really dig down into it and what's going on underneath the surface of that event or that moment in your life. Sounds like sort of what you're saying there, just to slow down.
It really, it's so funny. It's like, that's the thing I tell people, and I think and there's an irony. So if I can make my mind remember to come back to it, to me the irony of this is you're going to write most of the time the best, most likely to quote unquote succeed story if you're going deep down and slowing down and not trying to focus on, hey, I'm going to get the agent, I'm going to do this, and yet that's the sort of thing that gets it into us. But I think at that moment you have to separate those two things. You have to let that, whatever, put that on the shelf and go into the process and unearth things, because there will be things you will find if you slow down. Exactly the words I'm telling you, slow down. I mean, yeah, and you go into the deep, you'll make discoveries, and you will find the true story down there, or open up the story you're trying to write much better by slowing down. Yeah.
So you've mentioned the coaching that you do and the mentoring that you do. Tell me about some of the type of project that you like to work on, and what it is that you enjoy about coaching students. And do you work with new writers or more established writers, or a mix?
Yeah, and again, just anything I forget, bring me back, because I forget. But I work with beginners, and I have people who are very successfully published. Like, how did they come into my life? I don't know, but they are, And this whole mix, and it's always one-on-one, so it adapts to who they are and who I am, and we try to find that rhythm. So I'm a good dance partner, basically, in helping them get through this, and I'm sorry, I lost my thread, but oh, okay, let me
And
think.
what do you enjoy about the coaching? What's one of the sort of elements that really gives you that kick and makes you keep coming back?
Yeah, and again, it's always varying depending on who I'm working with. But I mean, obviously, it's so thrilling when somebody has breakthroughs and they discover, wow, this is hard, but it's really rewarding, and they get excited about their material and they drop into that. And I love that. And of course, when someone gets something published, that's just a whole other level. But really, it's about, because for me, it's very it's kind of a spiritual, it is a spiritual discipline, just like all arts are, including martial arts, I think. And I believe it helps you be more whole and complete in this world, to have something like this. I don't know what people do who don't have this. So if I can help somebody develop this discipline, so that this is a part of their lives and a sanctuary for their soul, if I can say something really over the top, but I think it is, because it's that for me, and if they have that, again, that's just where that weird irony is, then they're going to write anyway, because it's not so important to have the big success. And yet them writing like that very often is what will bring them the best product, for lack of a better word, that have the best chance of success. So, that's why, again, to slow down and trust this stuff. And then, I mean, again, nobody likes to get published more than I do, but they're like I'm like, two split parts of my brain, so I just have to keep the other one quiet while I'm writing, so.
Well, yes, I think that's a really, really valid point, an important point to make. I think for all writers, probably not just beginners, but that balancing the brain, or keeping part of your brain hushed for a while, and not even just the want to publish versus writing, but the writer brain and the editor brain, which are two such different skills. And it's something I have to remind myself to do when I'm first drafting, is switch off that editor and just let whatever comes out come out, so that you've just got something there that you can go back and grapple with and work with and improve or cut or whatever it needs to happen. Managing those two halves of our brains, I think, is really, really important. Do you find that the same for you? Do you have a way of managing that, of separating those two out?
Yeah, that's something, and I'm going to make it even more complicated, but this is something I think this is a part of my thing I do with people, because that is one thing, and believe me, this might make some newer writers, give them a little bit of comfort, but people who are successful have those voices too. They don't know that they're getting in their own way sometimes. That's why they hire me. If everything was fine, they wouldn't even be looking me up, but they're stuck, so they're needing some help. And a lot of those issues just, they don't, I think they get easier to handle, but they don't go away entirely, but for me, well, I mean, I get that inner editor thing. I had a girlfriend in New York who's getting her PhD, and she's brilliant, but she'd never heard this idea of the inner editor. And, writers talk about this, and she was stuck trying to write this thing, was so frustrated. And I told her, oh, that's an inner editor problem. And, and I explained to that it's a different voice for her. And I have a background that makes me a lot better at this. So I was very conscious of it. My inner editor is small and doesn't get in the way a whole lot. We've developed a dialogue and a communication over time so that we understand usually what's going on. But I visualized him when I was starting out and writing poetry, and he was getting in the way sometimes. And I saw him as a little man who sat on the end of my pen and lifted it off the page, and lifted the pen off the page, right? And so you can't write when he's sitting on the back end lifting the pen off the page. And I literally, this is theater, helps you have an imagination like this. So I'd say, okay, I'd tell him, says, you see what you're doing? I know you want me to write, but you're lifting the pen off the page. You don't need to be here now. You're actually stopping me from producing. So go to the pub or go to the coffee shop, and I will need you later. I will need your keen eye later. I mean, I compliment them on the way out, right? And and this one was not very primitive, right? So he got it. And so and when I'd get stuck and I'd realize, oh, I'm in that state of mind, my inner editor's suddenly taking over, and I'd look, it's all visual for me, look over and there he'd be, and they go, oh, you don't need to be here now. You need to go away for a while. I will need you later. Thank you. And so that was me. But my girlfriend's she's really imaginative. She needed to work through levels of this stuff. But she pictured her inner editor as like a pink 2-foot naked guy named George, who would yell at her and tell her, you're horrible, you stink, you don't know what you're doing. How dare you think you can write this? And that was the voice. And the thing about these voices, which is kind of my thing about all this, is they come through our own head and they sound like us. So we think this is the truth, and they take over our emotions. But if you're like me, you have a lot of voices in your head that do different things. They are all just voices. So if I think identify them, says, oh, that's that voice. That's that, it might be maybe your mom told you weren't any good, or a teacher, or whatever, these layers of resistance that are built in and that take over when we're vulnerable sometimes. If you identify, oh, that's just a voice, that stop us from doing all kinds of things all the time. And that really, there's a whole, if you're, again, in my case, there's a whole zoo of voices in your head. And so you can, hey, you're, that's a voice, that's just talking, just let him chatter. And now I'm going to go back with what I'm supposed to be doing. So I think getting aware of voices.
Yeah, no, it's a great, I don't quite have the same level of visualization that you do, but certainly I do sort of personify that voice in a way, and it sits on my shoulder, and I have to acknowledge that this is a different voice, this is not me, it's a different entity, and I can park it, say, just like you did, I'll come back to you. I'm not ignoring you. I know you're here, you're important, but I will come back to you. And I find it amazing how much, if that voice feels acknowledged and heard, it will calm down for a bit and let you carry on with the writing that you need to do.
It's amazing, really, just becoming aware of it and then addressing it a little bit, however you do it. And
so do you, the writers that you work with, you've mentioned, are new as well as more established. Do you work solely with literary writers, or do you work with genre writers or poets? Do you have a preference for the type of work that you work with?
I really don't. I mean, it's funny because I started with poetry, but I really don't work with poetry just because I haven't written it in so long. It's weird. I don't fully understand it, and I don't understand how to critique or help someone. I can help someone with process. I can tell them how to orient their day so they're producing, and I can read it and talk about it. But I'm better with narrative form. That's basically it. I mean, I work with literary writers a lot, but I like, the main thing people need, especially when I'm doing like a developmental edit, they need someone who can break down their manuscript, because they've got 300 pages and they have no idea what they've got or what to do, and they'll say, please help me. And it's hard work, but I go through, and so that therefore I will tell them, like, I'm not a sci-fi expert, I'm not a thriller expert, but what I can give them is break down the structure and tell them, I don't call myself an expert, but my area is story. I mean, again, this is more the developmental edit, and I can go through and come up with a roadmap and tell them what they've done and how their story is working and where they can go and do things. So that applies across all genres, really. Unless you're doing something really experimental, and then you're reinventing the wheel. Okay, good luck to you, and I'll work with you, but
before we started recording, you mentioned you found when you moved to doing longer form prose that there was a few resources that you were really helpful, and you thought they were worth mentioning today. I wonder if you'd share those with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, there's so many books out there. This is one thing I will say, is if anyone tells you, oh, I have the way to do it, and this is the way, you might want to take a step back. Oh, there's actually a decent one called Story Genius, which does exactly that, which makes me very angry. But she has one really good idea in the middle of it, but I'm not gonna go there. I don't want to, again, give out too many books, but especially, I mean, to me, this is a book everyone should read at some point. It's I'm sure you've heard of it, Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. I mean, and she's such a good writer anyway. It's so fun. So that's one I just say, if you do this, it will just help you so much. And I kind of think she is maybe the first big coach out there, All right, there we go.
Yeah, I'm just showing my copy. I keep it close to me all the time.
Yes,
I recommend. Yeah,
it's the one. And the other, again, for me, I think some people are more natural at long form than I was. I think it's one reason I can edit and help people, because I had to take it into my intellect. I had to get it. And so now I'm kind of wonky about it. I go, oh, elegant structure. I mean, I use terms like that now. So, but for me, it was learning to shift from short form. Again, I wrote these short stories after I gave up writing, and they all hit. They were bam, 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 bam. And it's like, I'm a genius. And then I tried to write a novel, and it didn't work at all. I mean, I ground my way all the way through it. But somehow through there, I was trying to learn how to do it. It's different. It's structurally it looks like a long short story, but it's not. It's structurally different. And for me, and I already mentioned it, is to read Robert McKee's story. And that just gives you, oh, here's a framework. And screenplays are much more rigid in if you're selling them, they want things to happen on page 30 and all this stuff. We could be a lot more flexible with prose and long form. But just for me, it gave me some handles I could hold on to, and that's what I needed. And a similar one is called, again, if someone is trying, it was like me struggling to learn how to do long form and needed some help. That was one. And then there's a book by John York, and I think he's British. It's called Into the Woods, a 5-act journey into story. And it's a really good, and it's more for prose writers, but he uses movie examples too. And McKee uses movie examples, again, because it's so clear to see this stuff. And here's my feeling about, like, McKee and screenplays are considered 3-act, and Shakespeare, of course, and York thinks novels are 5 acts. And my opinion about it is don't sweat that too much, because I think that's kind of different way, like looking at it from a bit of a different angle. Maybe there's a little bit more of a story, but the shape is really, whatever works is going to be fine, and either can inform this. So those are 3 books that I always first to recommend. So
fantastic, good recommendations there. Now, you did mention it just a little while ago that you have written, or you are writing, your first novel, and it's due out next year. And I have already asked you, about that crossover from writing shorter pieces to the long form, and the differences there. But what can you tell us about the book itself, about the story itself, and where the inspiration for it came from?
Yeah, I think the inspiration for it, this might be helpful too, because I'm going to do something not as well as I would like here in a moment. But when I lived, New York City was a very, very important place for me, and I came there and I kind of came to myself in a way, and it beat me up the first time. I had to leave, and then I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I came back, and then was there, had an incredible time the second time because I had a real job. I could afford it for a while. And then I left to go do screenplays and never could stop thinking about it. And then I moved back. So I lived there 3 different times for over 16 years. And I think the inspiration may have come from, because I used to wander the city a lot. And when, again, life happens and the economy collapsed and I lost my job, and you can't stay there without a job. You'll end up in a bad place. And I had to leave. And I think, but I had like 6 months before I had to leave. And I think my wandering the city and this longing and loss that I was feeling for losing my city was what kind of fed into the ideas for this novel. And so I have a guy from Texas like me, and he is there's this whole other story. There wasn't the original, maybe this is helpful. The original story, I had this guy, I was wanting to ratchet up the sense of loss and longing. So I put this guy into having an affair. He's having an affair with a married woman with a child, and they're all tangled up with each other. They've worked together in an office for years, and her husband goes away to Italy to work for 2 months. It's an unfulfilling marriage for her, but she loves her child. It's not an unhappy marriage. It's just unfulfilling. That can differentiate those two things. And she's from Italy. She initiates the affair, and he's been in love with her all this time anyway. And he almost had to leave, but finally managed to keep himself in check at this place. And suddenly this thing just happens. And so for her idea, I think that it's just going to be done quickly, but it's not what happens. They just fall deeply into each other, at that point. And, they're flawed people, but they're passionate people. And yet she knows better than, she's a practical person though. And she knows this is some flaky, artsy guy from Texas. I can't go running off to Mexico with him. I have this family, I have a child. And so this is the main storyline. 1988, New York City, AIDS haunted landscape. So all that's going on, and they have these 2 months together in this affair. So that's the main storyline. There's a second. So I had that, and I wrote out a draft of that. Really, I mean, not this maybe, but it's pretty much. I got some feedback that I needed more. Now I say it sounds good because I think it feels really filled out. But what the key for me was showing it to people, thinking about it, and coming to terms with, who is this guy? We need more. That's a lot, but still. So what I did was I came up with a childhood for him in a small city in Texas where his father dies when he's young, and his mother's an alcoholic, but he has these 3 very beautiful sisters, and they're older than him. And he's like he's like their pet and their little brother, but he takes on all the manly roles. I'm big brother, I'm man of the house. And so that's the real family, is these 4. And this relationship between them and what happens is what develops him not only into, well, like I say, he has a wound there, becomes a painter, basically an artist. He doesn't understand this, even when he's in this affair with this woman. He's coming to learn this kind of through this affair. But also what made him the type of guy who becomes the other man in a relationship like that. So I wind up all this psychological stuff in that understory and then the overstory. And so now it goes back and forth, and you get, oh, look at that. You get this back and forth with these 2 stories. So and it probably sounds complicated, and I had to design it over time. But if I could say this and jump into just ahead, the beautiful thing, and this is something with new writers, I'm always telling them, especially, I'm telling older writers too, but new ones, is like, you don't, and this is the bird by bird idea, that you can do your crappy first draft. It's not, you don't have to solve it all. You don't solve it all then. You want to solve pieces of it. And then you go, and I call it revising the magic wand. You get to go back over and then make it better. And you get to go back over and go, oh, I need more dimension here. And you can add something there. And that's how these things get written. Because I have found that people in my MFA program, that there were people who wanted to be a writer their whole lives. And because they loved literature, and didn't get that these what they're getting when you get a book that's beautiful, you don't see all the drafts that went into that thing, right? It's perfect. My God, does it come out like this? They think it comes out like that. It didn't come out anything like that. So you got to really get that into, in your head,
It sounds fascinating, and I particularly love that you've twisted it. Often we have the story where it's the woman who's the other woman, right. But I love that in this instance, it's the man who's the other man, and the dynamic then sort of playing out from a male perspective, as opposed to the usual sort of woman being the mistress. So
that drew me, that really drew me, that put a lot of energy into this. And the response I've got is that's one of the people really like that. And I don't know if I mentioned she's also his boss. So I don't think I mentioned that.
No, you did. So a real shift in power dynamic.
It is. And yet so it does all that. It plays with that. And yet it's really just two people. It really is about the two of them. They're kind of, to me, they're like a little bit like I'm sorry, all my references are American, I'm sorry, but well, there's Ilsa and there's Humphrey Bogart in the movie, whatever, I'm trying to think of the name, that movie, Casablanca. Yes, like, that Humphrey Bogart and Ilsa, they really belong together, but, and I think we get the feeling that these two really in another world would be together, but this world won't allow for it.
And when are you expecting that it will go out? Because it's you've got a publisher for it, haven't you?
Yes, it's actually really, it's a good big university press, University of Wisconsin, and it will come out a year from now.
Oh, exciting.
So I am, and luckily I've got a year to now that I've written it, and it's in for me to try to figure out how to market and all this stuff, which is not what I enjoy or what I'm natural at, but I've got to just hack my way through it, and I am. So
the next level, the next stage of it all. Well, I have loved chatting with you today. Thank you for your time. Just before we jump off though, I wonder, could you let listeners know where they can find out more about you and your services and your writing online?
Yes, thank you. You could go to my website, which over the next 6 months I'll probably be updating, of course, but it's a www.steveadamswriting.com, and that's the place. And thank you. I've really enjoyed, been very, very fun talking to you. So.
Yes, and you, thank you. Well, I'll make sure I mention, I'll put a link to your website in the show notes. And thank you so much. It's been lovely.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers, hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.